police officer is hurt when a gunman attacks a Tennessee school. We're following these breaking details tonight.
Plus, the race to vaccinate people against COVID may leave kids vulnerable to other illnesses. And Denver7 brings you a 360 look at the sky-high cost of living in Colorado.
It's statewide. This is not a front range issue. It's not a mountain issue.
We begin with that breaking news out of Tennessee tonight. A teenager is dead after a shooting on a high school campus in Knoxville.
The school resource officer at Austin East High was shot in the hip, but is expected to survive. Knoxville police say there is another person in custody. And moments ago, the mayor of Knoxville said she spoke to the wounded officer, who was in good spirits, and said, quote, thankful he was the one hurt and not one of the students.
Well, new body camera video indicates a suburban Minneapolis police officer thought she had her taser, not her gun, when she shot and killed a man on Sunday. Dante
Wright was 20 years old. Police call it an accidental discharge. Protesters hit the streets last night in response and are expected to do the same tonight. All sporting events in Minneapolis are postponed. And the governor just a short while ago called for a dusk to dawn curfew.
Now, police say Wright was stopped for a traffic violation Sunday afternoon. Officers determined he had a misdemeanor warrant. They started to take him into custody. They say there was a struggle. And as Wright tries to get into his car, the officer can be heard yelling, taser.
This appears to me, from what I viewed and the officer's reaction and distress immediately after, that this was an accidental discharge that resulted in the tragic death of Mr. Wright.
Now, the car continued to drive on for several blocks before crashing into another vehicle, and Wright was pronounced dead at the scene. The officer involved is now on administrative leave, and this sort of tragic mistake is not common, but there are at least a dozen incidents of guns being mistaken for tasers by law enforcement since the year 2000. This is according to research out of CU Denver.
Tonight, we're bringing you a 360 look at the homelessness crisis in the Denver metro. You can see it outside the state capitol 7 days a week, and you can see it in the data that puts Colorado among the worst states for homeless residents per capita.
It is growing, and our state's homeless population grew nearly 2% last year, and Denver is one of a handful of cities nationwide with a homeless rate higher than the national average.
And tonight, we're bringing you several perspectives on this. The politicians who believe developers need to be part of the solution, the cities pouring millions into shelters and other fixes, the critics who say this is not a problem we should spend our way out of, and of course, the people experiencing homelessness.
And we begin tonight with Denver7 Sloan Dickey and the plan to make affordable housing more accessible.
As housing prices across Colorado continue to increase, a potential new law targets simple economics.
It is basic economics. Housing affordability has to do with supply and demand, and we have less supply and more demand.
The state's seen some of the largest increases in housing prices anywhere across the U.S., a trend that started before the current pandemic, but has continued to this day.
And it's statewide. This is not a front range issue. It's not a mountain issue.
An obvious solution to higher prices is mandating affordable housing.
The current legislation is really, really simple.
The problem, Colorado doesn't allow cities to mandate their own affordable housing laws.
About 20 years ago, a Supreme Court ruling passed a decision that said that inclusionary zoning is a form of rent control. Rent control is constitutionally prohibited by Tabor.
House Bill 21-117 is trying to reverse that decision.
And so what this law seeks to do is uncouple rent control from inclusionary zoning.
The bill allows cities to regulate development in order to promote the construction of new affordable housing units,
thereby restoring that local authority to local governments.
The goal is to allow cities to regulate prices themselves as Colorado continues to grow.
And this is just another way to keep our eye on that ability to develop and grow effectively.
And perhaps bring the American dream in Colorado within reach once again. Sloan Dickey, Denver7.
And the affordable housing proposal, if it passes, kicks the ball over to cities to come up with a solution. In Denver, recent plans have focused on shelter spending. In late 2019, the city committed $15 million in contracts for shelter space. In March, city leaders approved another $15 million for shelter services, and part of that money came from a tax increase passed by voters in November.
And tonight, Aurora City Council will vote on whether housing is a human right, and it is likely to pass by a slim margin. It's purely symbolic. The vote will not mean any extra spending on homelessness in the city of Aurora. Now, you may recall Aurora Mayor Mike Kaufman has been one of the most divisive voices on this issue because Kaufman spent time living in homeless camps last year and wrote in the Denver Post that there are two distinct homeless populations in our state. He says those who use the shelters and those who sleep outside. Quote, he says, my observations hit a raw nerve with many of the so-called advocates for people experiencing homelessness because they did not comport with the narrative that these individuals are there through circumstances beyond their control and that the encampment lifestyle is not a choice.
One woman claims to have a long-term solution to the issue, but this one's unlikely to become a reality. Allison Eisinger, who runs the Seattle-King County Coalition on Homelessness, says cities need to raise taxes so they can buy enough housing units for everybody in need. Denver's already doing a version of this. Voters approved a tax hike. The city is investing in shelters, but they need at least 5,000 more beds to keep up with need. Of course, that's going to require patience and money. So what do you think? Do you have a thought about the solution to the homeless crisis? Specifically one we didn't mention here. We'd love to hear about it. 360 at thedenverchannel.com.
Nearly 1.3 million Coloradans are fully vaccinated as of tonight. The state gave another 65,000 doses of vaccine yesterday. And state leaders tell us there will not be any significant slowdown this week, even though we're getting significantly less Johnson & Johnson vaccine because of production issues. And counties will take control of their own COVID dials on Friday, and we're already getting some insight on how they'll handle it. The Tri-County Health Department, which oversees Adams, Arapahoe, and Douglas counties, will keep all three counties in level blue for 30 days, and then they'll allow businesses to operate with no restrictions at 100% capacity.
And if you still haven't gotten your shot, you might want to check out Ball Arena, like right now. The state sent an alert on Twitter this morning to let people know about open appointments at Denver's largest vaccination site. And at any point this afternoon, you could have logged on and scheduled an appointment there at Ball Arena for today. And do keep this in mind if you or someone you know needs a shot maybe later this week. And nearly 4,000 Coloradans who got a COVID-19 shot might have to get it again. State health officials say the Dr. Moma Health and Wellness Clinic in El Paso County improperly stored doses. They might not be as effective as intended. The clinic's upcoming vaccine appointments are being rescheduled at other locations while the state investigates what happened here and the next steps for those already vaccinated.
And we've been hearing a lot about the COVID vaccine lately, but that's not the only vaccine people are concerned about right now, especially as kids return to classrooms.
Contact Denver7's Jacqueline Allen found that many children are now behind schedule for their vaccines, and that could put them at risk.
So 1, 2, 3, 4.
While the vaccine making headlines these days fights COVID,
I appreciate you getting the message out.
Contact Denver7 found pediatricians across Colorado raising red flags about all the other important vaccines.
Are you seeing an issue with people not getting their kids vaccinated?
Oh, I think there absolutely has been a drop, not just in vaccination, but in well care.
Dr. Brian Gablehouse with Peak Pediatrics in Wheat Ridge says parents were afraid to bring their kids to the doctor's office at the start of the pandemic and got behind. A new independent report from Children's Hospital Colorado states that Colorado's already low childhood vaccination rates dropped significantly at the beginning of the pandemic. Look at this, 82% lower for kids 10 to 17, potentially leaving thousands of Colorado children vulnerable to vaccine-preventable diseases. Especially now that children are going back to school, public health leaders across the country say it's time to play catch-up.
We don't want an outbreak of measles in the school after all the work that we've done to stop COVID.
So in pediatric offices across Colorado, the message is clear. COVID is not the only vaccine needed by a long shot.
Hopefully we can get kids up to date on vaccines so they don't have issues with returning to school and participating in activities, going off to college, anything like that.
For Contact Denver7, I'm Jacqueline Allen.
Some chilly temperatures out there this afternoon, and I'm afraid you're going to have to get used to it.
Plus, vandals leave hate-filled graffiti on a Colorado church. Police need your help to find whoever is responsible.
And the Denver Zoo is celebrating a birthday.
We're actually celebrating our 125th anniversary this year.
And sharing their plans for the next 125 years.